What's going on, everybody? Mortem here, this time bringing you the announcement highlights for the Summer Games Fest opening showcase, which was a bit of a mixed bag, though at the beginning here I do want to mention that this is the opening showcase for those who might not be aware or are wondering why I'm doing this now. The, I would argue, bigger showcases are yet to come, with both the PC gaming show, the Xbox showcase, as well as Starfield's dedicated show being all on June 11th, with some other stuff even going on today, tomorrow, as well as eventually Tuesday. But the opening showcase was about a 2-hour show full of a variety of announcements and showcases, some of which I was actually looking forward to quite a bit and was happy to see. Others seemed a little pointless. There was a lot of ads for mobile games I don't think anybody cares about. And overall, I would say the show was just fine. It wasn't really great. It wasn't the worst I've ever seen. That said, we're going to obviously be covering the games I was most interested in, and as a PC channel primarily, that obviously doesn't include things like the nonsense mobile games. All of that said though, let's actually dive in and talk about this a little bit. First up, we have the announcement of an announcement, a classic move, but this time for Path of Exile 2. They showed us a rather quick snippet of gameplay before letting us know that they will have more to show on July 28th, and with the very recent release of competitor Diablo 4, it'll be interesting to see how that winds up playing out. Second on the list though, we have the FPS title primarily known as Witchfire. This one is a little bit interesting because while I am very interested in the aesthetic as well as just kind of the general premise of there being some big war, witches rising up and you being a sort of witch hunter who needs to stop them, it looks like a cool enough game, especially from some of the gameplay. However, while people will be able to check it out for themselves potentially in September, the problem here is that it is launching both into early access as well as exclusively on the Epic's Game Store, which means a lot of people aren't going to see this one. Both because a lot of people are very hesitant to play early access, and while I admittedly don't use the Epic Game Store very much, I think I've literally played one game on there, it is the only time I've ever heard of a game on there using early access, so that'll be interesting to see play out, I suppose. But overall, I mentioned this one just to say that while it's a game I was interested in, I probably won't ever play it due to these things, which is a real bummer to see. On to number 3 though, we saw some gameplay for Remnant 2, the follow-up to Remnant from the Ashes, which is, I believe, best described as a Souls-like, but with guns. And it's also my understanding it did some interesting stuff to sort of set itself apart from those games as well, but that is, I would say, the easiest way of conveying the idea. And Remnant is one of those games I've been meaning to get around to forever, and with the sequel coming out on just July 25th, pretty soon here, I should probably hurry up and get a move on with that one. Overall, though, it's looking pretty cool. I'm a little bit familiar with the original, but I haven't played it, but I was impressed with what I saw here, which looked like mostly an update on some of the somewhat clunkier mechanics of the original. Fourth on the list, though, we have Lies of P, a Souls-like based on the fable of Pinocchio, with obviously a much grittier take. This one I have gotten to play personally, and as can you, as there was a demo launched alongside the announcement, though in this case the demo sort of was the announcement alongside a slight delay. While originally slated for, I believe, August, it is actually just being pushed back to September 19th to allow a little bit more time for polishing, is what they said, and given the very short time frame change there, I'm inclined to believe it. Overall though, from what I've played of it, this game seems pretty cool, seems like a very polished Souls-like, and while it doesn't really bring anything new to the table that I've experienced in terms of those style of games, it does feel like a good version of those. But then we have Sandland, a rather interesting title that I'm not really sure how I feel about, to be honest, because while I love the art style, the characters look terrible to me. However, the rest of the art alongside the actual gameplay looks like a lot of fun. We are playing around in a sort of desert inhabited both by demons as well as humans, with the demon on display here apparently being co-opted into saving humanity in some way. And overall, it's a game I've got my eye on for sure, just because it looks very unique, though this one didn't have any sort of date attached to it, so it's hard to say much about it beyond that. Then, however, that was followed up with Alan Wake 2, the follow-up, of course, to Alan Wake, a sort of well-received paranormal game about a writer struggling with his sanity. But this is from the same people who later brought us Control, and I know a lot of people have been looking forward to this one, and from the gameplay it looks like they're going for a little bit more of a survival horror route this time, with this being some of the first gameplay we've ever seen from what I understand. This particular game we won't have to wait too terribly much longer for, as it is releasing on October 17th, 2023, and as for any coverage, for me, I would say maybe, I'm not really sure. Next up, though, we have some gameplay for Space Marine 2, the next entry in a Warhammer 40k FPS game, and it seems like we are just drowning in Warhammer games lately, and I would know because I've been covering a few of them. And while Space Marines looks really cool and we'll be battling against the hordes of Tyranids in that classic Warhammer 40k over-the-top style, and while I'm not particularly interested in FPS games myself, at least without some heavy role-playing elements, I have been getting into Warhammer 40k a lot over the past year or so it'll be interesting to see how this one shapes up, just like how I paid very close attention to the launch of Bolt Gun despite not really playing it for myself. Looks cool at any rate, and then we had a somewhat odd, I would say, reveal for Baldur's Gate 3, and I say odd because this isn't the main one. We know that they're showing more on June 11th, which they've already announced, but for some reason, Baldur's Gate 3 announced at this showcase that they had brought on a new voice actor, and they introduced several new characters, showed off a little bit of Baldur's Gate city proper, including some iconic buildings and everything from the original city and the original games even, but those weren't really the focus so much as the characters were, so just a very odd reveal overall. Seems like a weird thing to put here as opposed to their main showing on Sunday, but nonetheless, nice to see. Very excited for the launch of Baldur's Gate 3, which is coming August 31st, which we already knew. Then we have an update of sorts on Banishers, Ghosts of New Eden, which is a game from Don't Nod, the people who made Vampire, about two lovers, one of which is deceased, who go around hunting ghosts. And this is a game that the art style really pulls me in, and with how much I loved Vampire, I'm very interested to see how they pull this off and what kind of RPG elements they add to it. But more than anything, the art style on this one is just incredible to me. Something about this just really draws my interest. And while they don't have a date set yet, it is slated for sometime between now and the end of 2023, which realistically probably means November or December, but it's a game I'm excited for personally. Second to last, we have an interesting isometric action game called Lysfanga, I believe it is pronounced. It is a French name, is my understanding. And this particular game has a certain focus on tactics, but I wasn't entirely sure from the gameplay trailer how this was going to work. It seems we'll be able to make copies of ourselves, presumably on death or something, who can then be directed independently of us as well to help us attack enemies and perform certain tactical moves. And while that sounds like a good enough idea, I just didn't see enough in this trailer to really get a good feel for it. So it's hard to say one way or the other about this one. That said, it is also slated to release sometime this year, and with it being an indie game, I'll likely check it out in passing, even if I don't cover it. Last but not least, though, we have the Immortals of Aveum. This is an interesting game. It's releasing July 20th, so we really won't have to wait too much longer to find out about it. It's aiming to be a first-person shooter, but the twist is you're using spells. Think like Doom, but it's all magic. And while the game looks very visually impressing, I just don't know how well this game is going to do, honestly. It seems like there's a big marketing push for it because I keep seeing it everywhere. And overall, I would say I'm just very curious how this one is going to pan out, because the thing with games like Doom is that it's very action intense, you're very in the face of enemies, whereas this game really just seems like you're casting spells, and while there's a lot of great spell effects as well as visuals, I'm not sure it's going to capture that sort of power fantasy that games like Doom can give you when played properly. And with that in mind, I just don't think that flashy spells are really going to be enough to drive this one home. That, though, is all the games I really wanted to comment on. However, there were others mentioned in the show that were big game releases, such as a Spider-Man title, as well as the next entry in the Final Fantasy VII remakes, And while they're not really games I'm interested, probably worth a mention to be sure. Believe it or not, even with all of that included, there are plenty of games I did not mention, which means if there are any you are aware of that you'd like to talk about, by all means, leave it in the comment section below, and let me know what you think about these games or any others you want to talk about, really. And do keep in mind we have yet more announcements to come, with a lot of big ones happening this Sunday. In the meantime, though, regardless of all that, truly just thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. May you wander in wisdom and have an amazing day.